Good morning. Welcome to the Oxnard City Council Finance and Governance Committee regularly scheduled meeting, January 14th, 2020. And we'll have the city clerk take the roll, please.
Member Basua? Here. Member Perello? Here. Chair Flynn?
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, January 7th.
Please rise for the pledge. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we'll go to item B on the agenda, and that's public comments on items not on the agenda. And we do have one comment card, and that is Raymond Littell, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I would just like to remind the Governance Committee of the standard procedures for City Council meetings as you updated on 19 November 2019. Per Chapter 3 on page 12 under Ceremonial Calendar, the limit per item is not to exceed 5 minutes. It has been my observation that typically due to the reading of proclamations and such, multiple comments, speeches by ceremonial recipients, picture taking, etc., that the 5-minute limit is frequently exceeded. But don't get me wrong. Ceremonial items are welcome and certainly beneficial for the community and should continue as opportunities arise. However, you should follow your own procedures manual or update the manual accordingly to meet your actual needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Phillip Molina, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I need to ask the city attorney a question and remind two of the members that they've been invited for a luncheon on Thursday with Kevin Webb, one of our investment brokers, for a purpose of simply talking and getting education. We're not giving him any direction, certainly you're not. But I want to make sure, Stephen, that we can have two of the members of this committee at a lunch with a broker without violating Brown Act or anything else. All right, well, hopefully you'll get back to us before Thursday so I can let you know that you're invited and we hope to have a good lunch, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that ends the comment cards on items not on the agenda. And now we'll go to item C, which is the consent agenda and the approval of the minutes. What's the pleasure of the committee? Okay, and we have a motion, Madam City Clerk, by Committee Member Perello and a second by Committee Member Basua. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? So it passes unanimously. And now we'll go to reports under item D. And the very first item, number 1, is under the Finance Department, update on corrective action plan for single audit findings. The recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee receive an update on the progress made on the corrective action plan, otherwise known as CAP, C-A-P, in response to a single audit findings received for audits conducted on fiscal years 2015 through 2018 and direct staff to present the item to the City Council. Mr. Riper.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. In a moment, Assistant CFO Donna Ventura will make the presentation on the corrective action plan for single audit findings. I just want to underscore a part of her presentation, which will be to introduce to the committee one veteran employee in a new role and one new employee in a new role as well. We have, for several years, I and my predecessors have said we've lacked the resources to make as much progress as quickly as we would like on the corrective action plan. And these two employees whom Donna will introduce should help us make more progress, faster progress in the next couple of years. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Ventura.
Good morning. Morning. Well, I'll start with the introduction since Kevin set it up. Christine Williams, many of you may have met her in the past. She's been with the city for 4.5 years. She was our controller until recently, and she has just moved into a new position that we created, Senior Manager of Internal Control. So That's Christine there. And so we're very excited about that. I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of how much progress we can make and just ongoing monitoring of our financial controls. And then recently joining the city is Tanya Cheng. Tanya is right here. She has taken over the controller position for Christine. Tanya is a CPA. She comes from the private sector. And very excited to have Tanya joining us as well.
Welcome aboard.
So jumping in, let me make sure I can advance the slides here.
I'd just like to make a quick comment.
Yeah.
It's looking like the department is becoming increasingly female, and I'd like to say, Mr. Riper, pay attention to that.
Not intentionally so, I assure you. We only look to hire the best candidates, whatever gender, ethnicity, or background they may have. Okay. So I want to just highlight some of the background. It's been several months since we've been before you to update you on the corrective action plan. So just as a reminder, this kind of dates back to the 2014-15 audit that ED & Payne conducted, the single audit, that resulted in 111 findings. And since then, there have been annual audits. Each one has produced some additional findings that have totaled 172. We've developed a corrective action plan that started well before I arrived, and we've been making slow progress on that corrective action plan. Resource constraints have been a major issue, as well as just, system issues and things like that. Turnover slows things down. We last provided an update in April of 2019, and we will provide another update in May, probably April, May again, once the 2018-19 single audit is completed. So ED & Payne has completed their financial audit of the CAFR, which they'll be presenting next. And as part of that, they've done testing on the existing findings. So we've resolved some more of those. That's what I'll be presenting. But there will be an additional single audit that they're just starting now, which, hopefully won't produce many more findings, but we will see. Okay, as a reminder of the way we are defining the different status categories of the findings, there are 6 different categories. Complete means the finding's been resolved and the auditors have tested it and agree that the finding is resolved. So that's in the clear. To be tested is findings where we feel we have corrected the finding, but the auditors still have to test that it's been corrected to their satisfaction. Policy and procedure draft, a lot of the findings relate to developing policies and procedures, so that means that we're still in the draft phase of that and waiting to get those policies and procedures finalized. In progress may or may not relate to having a new policy and procedure, just we've started, but we haven't completed the implementation. Not started, that's pretty obvious. And then passed and no longer required are findings that the auditors put forward, but for various reasons have decided that they're no longer required. It could be that the item was insignificant. We've discussed them and agreed that it's no longer an issue that needs to be addressed. Okay. So, in a big picture, we have reduced, the last time we were here, we had 87 unresolved findings. We are down to 57, so we've made some good progress. 86 findings are complete. The ones that I focus on are the first 2 columns. Material weaknesses particularly mean that our controls are either non-existent or not functioning in a way that would prevent material errors from occurring in our financials. So we have to pay very close attention to those. We have made a lot of progress. There are still 23 material weaknesses left to be resolved. And what that means is that the auditors, because we have material weaknesses, they need to perform more audit procedures. They may need to do even more testing than they normally would to make sure there aren't any material errors in the financials and to be able to issue a clean opinion. Significant deficiencies, we have 22 remaining, and then non-compliance typically are related to grant requirements, and best practices are 8. So just to let you know how I've done this is, some of the findings are repeated year after year. There are 22 repeated findings. So really what we're interested in understanding is how many individual unique findings there are that need to be addressed. So there's, of that 170 or so, there's 148 that are unique. And 57 of those still are unresolved. So just to compare the last 3 fiscal years, starting with 17, 18, and 19, you can see last time we updated, there really wasn't any progress per se to report, but since fiscal year 18 ended, we have been able to make some good progress on reducing the number of material weaknesses and the number of significant deficiencies, and a little bit on non-compliance. So what have we done? Where has the progress been? What areas? 12 material weaknesses, 17 significant deficiencies have been resolved. I want to give credit where credit is due, because 21 of the findings related to IT general controls, and 11 of those have already been resolved. So they've made a lot of really good progress, and they're really close on the remaining 10. So IT gets a lot of credit for taking care of their internal control issues. We've also put in place several procedures around reconciling daily cash. We've improved the accuracy and supporting documentation of our journal entries. I won't go through the whole list. You've heard the presentation on the purchasing practices. There's been a lot of improvements there. And debt reconciliations and things like that. So we've I think, made some important improvements. Looking forward to 2020, we've already mentioned the new position that Christine is filling, so I really expect to see much more significant progress, no pressure, Christine, in 2020 to resolve the remaining material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. Also, very promising for us in finance is the long-awaited new ERP system that was recently approved. So obviously this is going to be a long road before we get to reap the benefits of the Tyler Munis system, because it's going to take, 2-3 years before we're finished implementing the financials. But that's going to go a long way to helping us automate a lot of our controls. And then we're also continuing to focus on training staff and making sure that we're constantly trying to raise the skills and competencies and keep people abreast of ongoing changes in accounting principles. So we've been sending a lot of staff to GFOA, the Governmental Finance Officers Association, and the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. Those are the two main organizations that we can get training through, but also, looking at ways that we can do more on-the-job training, and, documenting policies and procedures goes a long way towards that, but also doing more staff rotations and cross-training, I think, is necessary. It's just been challenging with some of the turnover that we've had to get stability in the department. But that's the goal for this year. And of course, stability and continuity in the key leadership positions is really important as well. So, Kevin and I just celebrated our 1-year anniversary with the city. and hoping there will be many more. So that is the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions from the committee first.
Thank you very much. Madam City Clerk, I presume Mr. Lavery would like to speak on this. Mr. Lavery, please.
You could speak first, Mayor, if you like. That's okay. Well, Happy New Year to everybody. I'm glad I made it. I'm glad I made it back. But one of the things I have a problem wrapping my head around is you have all these deficiencies and material weaknesses every year, but the city gets a clean audit. Now, I can't reconcile that in my mind. Now, the assistant said these controls are non-existent. Those were her words in some of these material weaknesses. So if the controls are non-existent, how do you get a clean audit? I just don't understand that. And it's been going on for years. So I don't know how to translate this, and it's hard to take these things seriously, material weakness, because year after year, the same issues come up, and a lot of them are repeat issues. Like there was, I think, 16 of the worst ones, the material weaknesses and significant difference, were repeat. You know, so they're coming up, they're not getting resolved. So how are they going to be fixed? I don't know what to do. How do you equate this to another industry? Like if this was our hospital, I know I'm exaggerating, but if the hospital says, well, we only have 23 malpractice suits this year. We had so many last year, or whatever. You know, I don't know. It doesn't add up that these things really matter. What do they matter, you know, to the city? Because they're not being resolved in a timely manner. Even though they're eating into them, and it's much better than last year, there doesn't seem to be any penalty for not complying. I mean, it seems to me that for the grace of God, there's no fraud, no scandal, no embezzlement going on because of the lack of these controls. So I have a lot of questions about how serious this really is. Is this a serious problem? It doesn't seem to me, because every year we get the same staff report that says we have staffing issues. You know, we've had that for 5 or 6 years. And so I don't know what the penalties are. Is the state controller's office still involved? Do they have to sign off on this? I don't know any of this stuff. And I'm just asking the questions. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ventura, just to respond, or even the CFO, so how would we respond to the speaker's concerns? And my understanding is, as far as the state controller is concerned, is that we have a corrective action plan. And as long as we're making progress on the corrective action plan, then that is not going to trigger further inquiry or concern by the state controller. I could be misinterpreting
No,
that.
that's correct, and we do file a report with the state controllers every year with an update on our corrective action plan, which we will do again in March this year. What I tried to explain in my comments was that having weaknesses in your internal controls doesn't necessarily mean that you will have inaccurate financial statements. What it means is that you can't be sure you have accurate financial statements unless the auditors do a lot more testing and a lot more work. So, for example, one of the material weaknesses that we have is performing timely bank reconciliations. Okay, so obviously we want to make sure that we're reconciling the cash on our books to the cash in the bank, and we do that. Our bank reconciliation process is extremely complex and extremely manual, and sometimes takes us 3 months or more to get complete. We've not found any issues. We haven't, found any fraud, but it's just the process and the systems make it very difficult to get our bank reconciliations done timely. That is a problem. We need to fix it. We are fixing it. We actually have somebody that we brought in just recently to work on this as its own special project to figure out how can we streamline our bank reconciliations so that they can be done more quickly and more efficiently. But it doesn't mean that there's a problem with the financial statements. It means that the controls are not strong enough to ensure that errors would be detected. So we have to do a lot more work. The auditors specifically have to do a lot more procedures to verify that the numbers are correct.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. So what we'll do now is go to committee member comments and questions. Why don't we start with committee member Basua, please?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm actually really happy to see that have had progress, at least where my viewpoint is. I'd like to see those numbers come down as far as the deficiencies and the controls. So the fact that you were able to do that in the first year you were here, I commend you. Yippee. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee member Perillo.
Can they put up slide 4? Because I think this really hammers on Councilmember Basua's comments. Have the highest respect for the member of the public that spoke, and I have the respect for the auditors. The concern that sounds like is that there was a question about how are we getting a clean audit. Are we implying that the auditors are not doing a good job? I don't know. I don't think that's it. But
The way
One
we
of the-
get a clean audit is by performing more testing
okay,
than would
and-
normally be needed. So that actually ends up costing the city a little bit more in terms of audit fees because of the extent of audit testing that they have to perform to be able to deliver a clean opinion.
In your opinion, are we going on a cheap, tightwad method of doing our audit to try to avoid finding something? I
No.
don't believe that's been the
No,
direction.
no.
Okay.
Definitely not.
I needed to ask that. I needed to ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay, it's impressive, the numbers that have gone down. The significant ones, I agree with Ms. Basu, and I'm extremely grateful our city manager brought the two of you in. A year. I've been on the council since June of 13. The mayor's been a little longer. Ms. Basu is getting up to her second year here. The improvements are night and day. I mean, the improvements are night and day. The one thing that I would like to see, we spent a lot of money with a lot of auditors. We've accepted the work that they're doing. We spent a lot of money with 4 laminated boards on each side of this room. And I think that there's time, you either put a check mark that something's done because we've reduced the amount of complaints from 87 to 57. That's 30 of them been resolved over a 20-month period. I think there's got to be something that we can show the public when they walk in and they go, holy crap, that's the scorecard and nothing has changed. That's a suggestion. And other than that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ventura, could you talk a little bit about the ERP and, there's some obvious implications about having an ERP and how that will assist us in making even more progress and really getting on track. But could you kind of just give a big overview about the ERP and the major, let's just say, attributes that are going to pierce through this whole chart here?
Sure. So you probably realize that many of our processes are paper-based in the city. And so, one, it's slow because we have to wait for all this paper to get compiled and then somebody to input data into the system. And then data gets input incorrectly and then we have to find it and correct it. What modern systems allow is more validation of the data up front. So if we take it, for example, our timesheets, which are currently paper-based, and this is the first thing that we're implementing is electronic timesheets. So people fill out their timesheets, somebody else enters their timesheet in the system, we subsequently find out that, this particular person is not authorized to charge time to this particular project, so now we have to go back and fix it. And all of those things take time and resources and, take attention away from other things that we should be focusing on. With an electronic timekeeping system, the individual employee enters their own time. If they're not supposed to charge to a particular code, they won't be allowed to up front when they enter their information because the system will have a validation check to make sure it doesn't get entered that way. That's just one small example of the kinds of things that we can do with a modern ERP system that automates a lot of the controls that are currently manual.
Thank you very much. And then the second question is in reference to the speaker and or even the introductions that were made at the very beginning of the committee meeting. And that is, if we were to talk about what percentage of the positions in the finance department are actually filled so that we could get an idea about when we're going to hit full capacity, when we're going to reach full capacity.
What percentage would you say, Kevin? Yeah.
In general accounting, we're recruiting 3, and in purchasing and in budget, we're full. So what's 3 out of 40, what's 3 out of 32.5? We're a shade under 90% staffed.
That's excellent. Thank you. And then the last question, Ms. Ventura, could you talk about, I'm particularly interested in the best practices. Could you talk about most recent best practices, maybe even take 1 or 2 and just talk about that, toot our horn a little bit?
Well, so maybe I can clarify, first of all, when we say best practice here, it's a finding that's saying that, well, it's not as severe an issue as a material weakness or a significant deficiency, but it would be a best practice if we did it.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so it's not saying that these are our best practices. They're auditors' recommendations that, while it's not necessarily a control deficiency, it would be a best practice if we implemented this.
I see. Okay.
So it's the lowest in terms of severity of the findings
Very
that
well.
we have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very well. And then last question
Yeah.
is, what do we think, we've made a lot of progress. So you need to be thanked, Mr. Riper needs to be thanked, the finance department needs to be thanked, the city manager, the leadership, for really getting through these things because, I mean, as committee member Basua said, I mean, that was her observation. I'm really pleased, as am I, and I would imagine Councilman Perillo is too, about the progress that we've made. Given the fact that we're at 90% of capacity or our staff capacity, how, without, nailing you down to an exact set of figures, saying, so when you come back next year at this time, or when we're given our next report, you're just going to, wait a minute here, you told us this. How much progress now that we're reaching that full capacity of staff level do we think we're going to be able to make on this corrective action plan? In other words, are we a year, 2 years, 3 years away from being finished with it?
Well, I hear my boss saying 2. I would be more aggressive and say 1. He doesn't like that. But yes, I feel like we certainly should have the rest of the material weaknesses resolved by the end of this calendar year.
Okay.
That would be my goal.
Wow. That's very pleasing. Okay, thank you very much. That is very encouraging news. And this presentation was just an update for the committee members. So we would like more presentations like this. Committee Member Perillo.
Just one question, and thank you very much. And congratulations to the staff, and also congratulations to the council for approving this expenditure for the ERP. You mentioned 2 to 3 years to implement it, and then we think that there's possibly going to have the material things done by the end of the year. Not holding your feet to the fire. Okay. But is the implementation taking place the majority in the finance department?
Well,
And the only reason I ask is if we're still having to do paper documents and things like that, will it be a couple of years down the road we're still doing that, or?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, the ERP has multiple modules. The first module we're implementing is the electronic timekeeping, which is citywide. So everybody, hopefully by the end of this fiscal year, will be doing electronic timesheets. But then we'll be looking at core financials. So this will be, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, general ledger accounting. All of that will primarily be managed by the finance department. That will probably take 18 to 24 months to implement. And then there's other modules like in, economic development, business, licensing and permitting, and there's HR in terms of performance management. So other parts of the city will have, big parts to play in the implementation, but the core financials will be primarily managed through finance.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
Thank you. And thanks.
Yes, and then, Ms. Klima, before I call on you, I know that it also, the item directs the committee or to direct, send this to the council. So I don't know if that needs a formal vote, but, all right, so we have a motion to do that. Second by Committee Member Basua. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? So that's done. Yes, Ms. Klima.
I just wanted to add, Ms. Ventura and Mr. Riper as well are tremendously modest, but they've made tremendous growth and tremendously overhauled this department. They've had incredible turnover. They're at 90% capacity, but the story they're not telling you is there has been a lot of turnover, and they filled a lot of positions with excellent new folks, and we're very, very excited and very proud of them for all of their growth. And in that process, they've managed to do all this. So they're doing a tremendous job. We're very excited about everything they're doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
thank you for the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Eden Casareno for the CAFR presentation next. She's our partner from Eden Payne.
Okay, so let me go ahead and read that item, and then that's fine. Okay. You're very ambitious, the one-year corrective action plan and with the agenda. So, okay. Item 2, Finance Department. And again, Mr. Riper, I'd pay notice on all of these developments here. Anyway, subject, fiscal year 2018-2019 comprehensive annual financial report and summary presentation. The recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee receive and recommend that staff proceed to the full City Council with their transmittal of fiscal year 2018-19 comprehensive annual financial report, otherwise known as a CAFR, and summary presentation presented by the city's external auditors, Eden Payne. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. Glad to be here again. I would like to introduce Mary Maxian, who is our manager at for the audit of the city. This is her first time she's going to be presenting in front of you. So good luck, Mary. So I'm going to present the results of our audit for June 30, 2019 fiscal year. First, I wanted to mention that the CAFR that was included in your agenda packet had been revised due to the, the deadline to be published had been very earlier than we thought it would happen. We provided you a copy, and then we continued to make changes to it, or at least review it, and found other changes. So I believe you have a copy in front of you, a list of CAFR changes. These are the changes that were made to the CAFR after it was published in the agenda packet. None of these changes have an impact on the basic financial statements, meaning the statement of net position, all the statements that have numbers in them. None of those were changed. The management discussion and analysis were not changed, other than minor wording changes. There's the main changes that happened are in the required supplementary information, the notes to the disclosures, as well as a statistical section. So we have published now a printed copy of the CAFR, and thank you very much for the city manager's office for the cover. It's really nice. And it's also been published in your website, the final CAFR. So let me cover this one. Okay. So this is the agenda that I wanted to cover today. We'll talk about the opinion. We'll talk about some highlights in the CAFR, And the revenues and expenditures, those will really include the general fund, and then any combining schedules that we have added to the CAFR, and then critical audit matters that we are required to communicate to you. So this year, as in the past 2 years, you have a clean opinion for your CAFR June 30, 2019. Those are located in pages 1 to 4 of the CAFR itself. So what does a clean opinion mean? That means that your financial statements, as they are presented here in the CAFR, are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Now, our opinion covers the basic financial statements, including the note disclosures. It also covers, to a limited extent, the supplementary information and other required supplementary information. The letter of transmittal, as well as the statistical section, are not included in our opinion. But those are presented to you by management. The financial statements are the responsibility of management. We assisted in preparing them, but they are the representation of management itself. So let's talk about the CAFR highlights. As you can see, these two pie charts are pretty much the same. 2018 and 2019, they are very, very similar as far as the net position of the entire government. This includes all departments. This includes the Oxnard Housing Authority, includes water, wastewater, everything that the city represents. What is net position? Net position is the difference between your assets and liabilities that represents the city's ability to pay your obligations when they become due. So a positive number of $2.2 million in each of the years is very positive. There's three components of net position. If you look at your statement of net position, there's net investment in capital assets, restricted net position, as well as unrestricted net position. The good thing about this year is that your unrestricted net position went up by $50 million. It is still in a deficit position because of liabilities in the pension and OPEB, but it went up, and that means that any positive movement means greater ability for you to pay your bills when they become due. So there's still work to be done because it's a deficit, but that's a positive one. These pie charts represent governmental activities, revenues, and expenses. So revenues are to the left, expenses are to the right. This is also very similar to prior years. This just represents the breakdown of where your revenues come from and where you spend most of your, all of your expenses during the year. Again, this represents governmental activities only. Mary will talk a little bit on the business type activities, meaning your water, wastewater, and other business type activities. So I wanted to say that expenses have gone up since 2015, up by about $50 million in the governmental activities. So from 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, it went up by 50. The dramatic increase was between 17 and 18, when expenses jumped by 64 million, about a third of the prior year. Fortunately, you were able to reduce that this year, and hopefully next year you'll continue to reduce that, but by your budget cuts that you had done in June of 2019, because your revenues, your governmental revenues, are really very limited. Since 2015, revenues only increased by $20 million approximately. So compare that with 50 in expenses, you're down by 30. So since 2015, property taxes, which is the biggest number or pie there in the revenue, the pink one, that only increased by $12 million. Sales tax, which includes your Measure O, increased only by $8 million. All other governmental revenues remained approximately the same. So there's work to be done in reducing your expenses, and that is something that you need to think about in the future. So Mary is going to talk a little bit about the business type activities and general fund, and I will close it after she does.
Good morning, Chairman and members. I'm Mary Maxion. I will go over the business type activities in comparisons from last year to this year. As you can see on the graph there has been significant increases in water and wastewater. That is mainly due to the water and wastewater rate increases over the past. What I do want to highlight here is, despite the growth in net increases for the current year, we have to continue, or the city has to continue, to pay close attention to the variance between your revenues and your expenses in order to build up reserves for the future, and that would enable you to also replace your aging infrastructure. Moving on to the general fund. As you can see on the graphs, also here we had increases in revenue. It was actually increased by about 14 million this year, whereas expenditures net of transfers, while it had an increase of 8 million, your net increase overall was about 6 million. So overall, very positive for this year. Let's take a closer look at your revenue sources. Just as Eden mentioned, your general fund's main sources of revenue are taxes, mainly property taxes and sales taxes, including the Measure O, which makes your revenue stream very difficult for you to control. It is driven by economic factors, nationwide and as well as locally. And that's why we encourage you to pay close attention to what you can control, which are the expenditure side. Let's move on to the next slide. The majority of the general fund's expenditures are in public safety. Expenditures this year have decreased, which is mainly due to the hard decisions that had to be made during the budgeting process. And so that's overall good as long as we continue that trend. What we have found during the audit that we wanted to draw your attention to were budget amendments. We noticed that in July 2018, the original budget for expenditures started at approximately 143 million for the general fund. However, there were budget amendments during the year that added an additional 12 million in expenditures. Fortunately, by the end of the year, not all of those extra budget amendments were spent, and also fortunately, the city's revenues exceeded the original budget, which at the end still left us with a net increase, but that was just one point that we wanted to put out there for you to consider. Moving on. This is a new schedule that we included in the CAFR for this year, which is the breakdown of the general fund group. Here we can see the breakdown between the general operating fund, the half-cent sales tax, which is also known as the Measure O tax, street maintenance, performing arts center, and the golf course. There are also other funds included in here, such as the general fund carryover, the Oxnard Police Department, the training, and the stormwater management, payroll clearing accounts, and the City Corps Trust, and the Contribution Trust. So that is for your additional information. And just to close this, and before I pass it on to Eden, just as something I want to point your attention to is the unassigned fund balance of the general fund. It is for this fiscal year at $9 million, which is equivalent to about 3 weeks of the general fund's annual expenditures, whereas the Government Finance Officers Association, also known as the GFOA, advises to have at least 2% to ensure that your liquidity is there and that you're able to pay your upcoming bills. Okay. Yes.
Can you repeat what you just said, the GMA recommends?
The GFOA recommends at least 2 months of your annual expenditures. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mary. So the next topic that we have is, required communications required by our auditing standards. But before I go over those, I think what I wanted to summarize, I think what our highlights, our financial statement information tell you. So in the past 5 years, like I said, your expenses in the governmental activities have outpaced your revenues. Going forward, you need to examine whether the city's revenues can cover the expenses that you anticipate. One thing that Mary had said, we know that you start with a balanced budget at the beginning of the year, but you have to keep track of that, make sure that your budget is still balanced, in the middle of the year, at the end of the year, because at the end of the year of 2019, you actually had budgeted more expenditures than you were anticipating in your revenues. So that is something to think about as you go along during the next year. In your business type activities, your financial performance for this year is very good. What we need to let people know is that this business type activities, you have to exceed, your revenues always have to exceed your expenses because you want to build up your reserves. You want to be able to have funds to not only for your rainy day, but also for capital improvements year to year. In the general fund, Mary had mentioned the unassigned fund balance. That is the fund balance that is flexible, that you can use from day to day. It's not designated to be used in anything else. That has been declining in the past 3 years. That is something that you need to shore up and bring up again in the next years or so. So those are the 3 main things that I wanted for you to take away today. Oh, sorry. Oops. Okay, so now to the critical audit matters. We did not encounter any major challenges during our audit this year. Actually, I want to make special mention to all of those that helped us complete the audit this year in such a easy. It's not really easy, but much better than in the past. Our finance department, of course, our city manager's office, really helpful. City attorney's office really helped us with, disclosures and things like that. But the other departments as well, HR, IT, Public Works, Housing, am I missing? Treasury Department. Yes, they were very helpful and instrumental in completing our audit. For the first time in the past 5 years, we did not have any material audit adjustments. Yay.
Wow.
So I don't know if you remember, but in the past, we have this long schedule of all the adjustments that we had proposed and accepted by the city. This year, we'd have no material adjustments. There were still some, but not material items. There were new accounting pronouncements that were implemented this year. I'm just going to have you go read that. Accounting estimates, there's always accounting estimates in your financial statements, but the main ones are in the valuation of your OPEB liability, your pension liability, and self-insurance claims. Those are conducted by an actuary. Significant disclosures that I want you to pay attention in the CAFR involve cash and investments, bonds payable, pension and OPEB liabilities again, and risks and uncertainties in the future. Other audit findings, so we have a report that will be issued in March 2020, along with your single audit, that will include a report on your internal control. That is, and also on the status of the city's corrective action plan, and I think we will be presenting that to you in April. So that is at the end of our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Lavery, would you like to speak on this item?
I'm the only one. Yeah. I wish there were more people speaking, to be quite honest. This is not a good thing. This is the things that concern me. Oh, by the way, thank you for the year of service, too, to the finance director and his assistant. It is like night and day, like people have said. I remember 10 years ago, staff was actively hiding things from the council and the public. So things have changed quite a bit. One of the things I don't get is you cut $5.1 million from the budget. That was in the city manager's message. And the auditor says you have to watch your expenditures in general government because you spent $50 million, but your revenues only went up $20 million. Not what's in that general government, you need to know, is not the same as general fund. Right. Completely different. Right. So it's a little bit misleading how she said that to me. But how do you cut $5 million from the budget, but how many millions did you give to employees? More than double that, maybe, in raises? I mean, is that the right thing to do? I mean, the aggregate cost of all these employment agreements, when you get into the second and third year, it's got to be more than double that. But services have been cut to the public. You cut $5 million in services, people are really complaining about how the landscape looks. That's the number one complaint I hear from people. They're not getting those services. You got a guy running around, 76-year-old guy, leading the charge to clean up all these areas. That should be the city's responsibility. I think that's an embarrassment to the city. No disrespect for this guy, but this is the city's responsibility to clean up this stuff and find the resources, not volunteers. I think that is awful. And the thing is, there's all this discussion about needed new revenue streams, but you're not cutting costs. Why are you giving employees raises when you say you don't have enough resources? And why? But in the general fund, if you look, on the other hand, the general fund took in $2 million more than it spent. So the general fund was healthy this year. So even with all those raises, the general fund ended up in a positive balance. I mean, it took in more money than it spent. So where's the call for sales tax increase? I don't see any justification in anything I've heard here or in the S&P report that says the city needs a sales tax increase. Nothing at all. There's no long-term forecast that has been produced that says that. It's just people are saying it. They're saying you need to get, but there's no actual demonstrable documentation that says this needs to be done. I look forward to when that comes out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Purcell?
So I want to put a little broader perspective on where Oxnard is. When you get to CAFR, you look at it, maybe you compare it to the prior year, but you're kind of looking at it in a vacuum. So I want to give you a little broader perspective. What I'm looking at is a document published by California Senator John Morlock. It's the 2019 Financial Soundness Rankings for California's 482 cities. And you have to scroll way to the bottom to find Oxnard. They are ranked 391 out of 482. And the basis for the ranking is, you heard the auditor talk about the unrestricted net position, which is difference between your assets and liabilities. So this ranking is based on unrestricted net position per capita. So it adjusts for the city's population as well. And so when you rank all the cities that way, Oxnard comes out kind of towards the bottom. So we, even if you resolve all your problems with your accounting system, which obviously we have to do, and stop having findings, even if you're reporting correctly, you still have the issues of your overall financial soundness, and that's kind of what this ranking gives you an idea of. So if any of you wants to see that, I can email you the document if you'd like to have it. But anyway, I just thought I would put a little broader perspective on where Oxnard ranks relative to other cities in the state.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the speakers, and now we'll go to Committee Member Perillo.
Number one, Ms. Purcell, if you could share the link to the city management so they could share it with the council, I appreciate that. I'd just like to, on the very beginning of the presentation, not by the auditors, but the presentation of this item on the agenda, there's a paragraph on page 22 of the full agenda. It says, unfortunately, due to a variety of issues, Oxnard city government faced a variety of challenges under previous administrations, resulting in skepticism and disappointment from the public and internal city stakeholders. From 2018, the new city administration and council have taken decisive, methodical steps to improve fiscal and government transparency, helping to restore confidence and trust. We seek to continue the positive momentum and continue to give our residents the quality of services and accountability they expect. All of the public speakers have addressed issues that are very valid. And as far as making the cuts, we've had an interim city manager before the current city manager came on board who told us we needed 3 years of $7 million cuts each. He retracted a little bit, but that's what I was told as a councilman. The entire council was told that. The last budget, the city manager gave us a figure that he needed to cut. The council decided to go in a different direction. We took the majority of the cut. Reading this report, and I'm sure all the council members will, it identifies more cuts. And it is embarrassing when you have a gentleman at an age that he is, Mr. Booz, even the enthusiasm that he has cleaning the mediums. But he sets a hell of an example for a city that's trying to get out from under. The questions that I had with respect to this kind of stuff, you've been here. The majority of the people that spoke have been here when our city manager told us we're living beyond our means. Now, if you're living beyond your means, you make some choices. We tried. We've taken a bit of a cut. We have things that are coming down the road. We're talking about cash investments. The Treasurer's Department, through the good graces of the people that work there and their skill and cunning, they've been able to get a good return on the investment, but the investment and the rates are going down. So we're going to reduce the income coming to the city on that one. When we have there's a lot of, ladies and gentlemen, the council has to face the music. There's going to be cuts. The questions with respect to why are we giving the employees the raises and why are we giving the employees the benefits? We're at risk of losing good employees. We've lost some good employees. I believe the city has to pay for quality employees, but you have to live within your means again. I supported the raises. I cannot support future raises. And I do look forward to the city getting in a better situation. There's going to be pain and suffering coming, you know, Winston Churchill said it better than anybody else. Blood, sweat, and tears. It's not going to be easy. When people come forward and they want this and they want that and they want that, they need to understand. There's been a presentation that was outreached this last week at Windsor North River Ridge Neighborhood Council. I see that there are going to be multiple presentations going on through the various city neighborhood councils. I'd recommend anybody watching this or anybody in the audience attend those things. I don't think that they're pulling the wool over anybody's eyes when they make the presentation. I appreciate the auditors that have stuck with us. I appreciate the auditors taking the heated questions and direct questions I've asked them in the past. Thank you. But believe it or not, we are getting out of this bucket of crap. It's not pretty. Nobody's going to be out of this thing clean. But we got into it through the good graces of people in the past who were trying to do the best thing, but they made mistakes. That's the best I can say.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Basua.
Thank you. I want to thank Mary and Eden for their presentation. I got your point loud and clear as far as where the council needs to pay extra attention in. I was a bit surprised to hear about the unassigned fund balance. I think that's really important for our council members to realize that we only have about 3 weeks worth of money in order to move the city forward. And it's really important for us to know that when we're making decisions such as raises and everything that we're giving. Now, with that comment, I also want to say I also supported the raises. And I'm not oblivious to what I did. I understand the mythology that went into it. I understand what the speakers are talking about. I understand how the city does, you know, their calculations, and that is how we do it in government. That is how we present it. At the end, it all equals out to the same. It's just a matter of how you're going to present it. I'm not oblivious to that. I'm not oblivious to what I said yes to. But now that, you know, we have, or we're giving the resources to staff and to the management team to go out there and retain personnel, I also do expect the work to start and for us to move forward. I don't want to hear we don't have the personnel, we don't have the resources, they're leaving because we're not paying enough. You know, we're competing with larger cities. Okay, well, the council has, you know, now extended itself to management and said, we believe in you, go ahead and do this work. So, Mary and Eden, thank you for the presentation. I just want to make sure that my fellow council members understand what predicament we're in if something should happen. We only have 3 weeks in the bank moving forward, and we really need to take, you know, into consideration every time they're asking for a budget amendment. Every time they're coming to us to say we need extra, that we look and we take into consideration before we approve these things to look at where we're going to end at year end. But thank you for your presentation. It was loud and clear to me. And also to the speakers, I hear you loud and clear. We are going to move forward. And I have every confidence in this management team to move the city to a new direction. So thank you.
Thank you very much. As usual, with any financial report to the city, there's always a mixture of very positive news and obviously negative news. And there are those that always focus on the positive and those that in most cases and always is an absolute term. So there's those that tend to focus on the positive and those who tend to focus on the negative. And it's always bringing those two together that I think is a more accurate reflection of what financial position the city's in. The bottom line is that even though I think on in the last year and a half in particular, and even preceding that with the previous city manager, the city is beginning to make changes regarding the city's finances that previous city councils were either never faced with or not willing to deal with. And the blunt reality of the city and its overall, the big picture, is reflected in the reports that we've received here today, and that is that the major source of revenue for Oxnard, 2/3 of the general fund revenue, comes from sales taxes and property taxes, $90 million. We spend almost every single one of those $90 million on public safety. And it's about 2/3 of the overall general fund budget in this city that is spent on public safety, which means we place public safety as a percentage of our budget higher than any other city in Ventura County. It's a little bit of an irony because there have been times where those people have come before this council and said that we are not spending enough on public safety. So I don't know how, how that reconciles. 2/3 of our budget is on public safety. But getting to the core of the matter here, and this is how I would distill the information. Whether it's the ranking that one of the speakers referred to, and I would say that the UNC unrestricted net position divided by the population per capita to come up with a per capita figure, that's one way to estimate something. And if we actually looked at the per capita revenue the city generates, it's very low. And because there's a lot of poverty in Oxnard. And so when people talk about, what are you guys doing? You're cutting services to the public, and at the same time you're giving raises. Well, we all know what happens. It's a competitive marketplace. And if a employee can perform the same function here, but in neighboring Ventura, they can perform the same function, but they're going to get 10% or 20% more, it's just a question of time before they consider changing or jumping ship. So the fact of the matter is that the same thing has come up over and over again, and I'm just going to say it to the council, and this is going to be, I've had these conversations with the city manager. I haven't had them lately, but they'll probably start up again. He's probably not going to like it. But it is our unrestricted net position, and our financial challenge is a challenge that's faced by many cities throughout the state of California, and that is the pension liability problem and the post-retirement benefit problem. Those liabilities are huge. And God forbid if we have a recession and the stock market returns even less, because that liability is only going to grow. Everybody knows that. And the reason why we have such a large liability today can be attributed to many factors, but one of them is the performance of the stock market over the last decade to a decade and a half. So it's the pension system is really based on gambling. It's almost like a gambling casino. I hate to say it that way, but that's the bottom line. The bottom line is this city generates per capita one of the lowest amounts of revenue in Ventura County. Ventura, neighboring Ventura, I talk about it all the time, has almost the same general fund budget as the city of Oxnard. They have half the population. So they have almost per capita double the revenue than we do. So that's the reality. If you have 3 families living in one home, you're not going to have property taxes, which are right now $60 million. They should be $90 million. We're probably $30 million short for a city our size. And if you have lower disposable incomes by large groups of people in a city, that means the sales tax, which is $30 million, excluding Measure O, is going to be much lower. That sales tax, hypothetically, should be $50 million. We should have a budget of $200 million a year. Our budget's $141 in the last fiscal year. That's the reality. And the last thing is that recently the city manager and many department heads gave a presentation in the Windsor North neighborhood. The fire department used the city of Huntington Beach just to compare between the city of Oxnard, and again, it was Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach has a general fund, if I recall correctly, of $231 million. Same size population. Oxnard's general fund is 141. 231, 141. Did the quick math. We have 60% of the revenue, and that's very similar to the city of Ventura. We have about 60% of the revenue per capita. So I appreciate the speakers, making us aware of the fact that we still have these major challenges to go, but you see the position the city is in. Are we going to not give raises, lose employees? and not be able to attract quality employees, it's a balance. It's a very delicate balance. And I know that Mr. Nguyen and I have had discussions one-on-one on a number of occasions about how are we going to crack this nut, this unrestricted net position, which is, forget even talking about that. Bottom line is we have a major challenge in the unfunded liabilities of our pension system and the post-retirement benefits. And that is the lion. That is that's the big factor. And we need to make progress, and we need to not talk about it in a threatening way. We need to talk about it in an open way. Not threaten anybody, say, you know, you need to do this and you're responsible for this. We just need to take and exert a lot of leadership. The last thing is, Councilman Perello, myself, and Committee Member Perello, Committee Member Basua, to the city manager, he's aware of the fact that we have concerns that we have 3 weeks, not 3 months. I wish we could say 3 months. We have 3 weeks of money in the bank if we get into trouble. The best practice is 2 months. And there are cities, even Camarillo. I think Camarillo has $60 million in its unrestricted fund balance. $60 million. And it has 1/5 the population of Oxnard. The outlet malls are their major source of revenue in that city, right? So I know that we're making progress, and this is a mixed bag. Anybody that says this is all good or all bad is incorrect. We're making progress, and I, as the chairman of this committee, will say that I attribute that to the leadership of the previous city manager, who made some very tough choices. Arguably, he made too many decisions too soon. And now we have Mr. Nguyen, who is making excellent decisions, I believe, but the council is taking the heat for it. In the right online today, there are people complaining about cutbacks to youth recreation and the fact that we have homicides in this city. But the fact of the matter is that someone's position is always going to be at stake. No matter what we do, someone's position is going to be at stake. So I know my remarks have been extensive, but I'll end by saying what was given to us in the presentation. This is the first time in 5 years that there are no material adjustments. And that is a great accomplishment. So we're making progress. Thank you. So this item will be presented to the City Council. Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Perello, second by Committee Member Basua. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right. And why don't we just very quickly focus on the last item, E, items for future agendas. What I'd like to do when we have a little bit more time is actually go over the list. I'll get the list for the committee of requests that committee members have made, and then we can maybe go over it during that time period and then make any adjustments and give feedback to the city manager and the staff, if that would be appropriate. Are there any? Yeah. Yes, Councilman, Committee Member Perello.
There's just a few things that I would like to make sure the city has on their radar, but I would also like to say that tomorrow, Wednesday, January 15th, Yolanda's, the one in Camarillo, Ventura, and Simi Valley, from 11 o'clock till closing. They're donating to help wheelchairs for veterans. If you go there, a portion of your thing goes to the veterans tomorrow. The concerns that I have are the risk facing the city of Oxnard. Stormwater drainage, surface runoff, potentially getting into the harbor. Is that going to affect us? The levy funding for the SCR3, the VRSD landfill in Simi, and the seawalls. This is a risk that potentially the city of Oxnard could be facing, and I want to make sure that we're aware of them. That's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. And with no further discussion, this meeting is adjourned.